So it is very ironical that this is the first meeting, the Franc-Afrique meeting, that is happening outside the French colony, because Kenya is a British colony. So the first meeting that is happening outside the French colony is in Kenya, Nairobi. The main problem with African leaders is they don't define our interests. So they have their own interests. It is so ironical. So we can have a look at what Professor Lumumba is talking about in relations to what Macron is talking about. Then when we come back, we can analyze the video further. Let's have a look at this.
But we make the claim that our foreign affairs is trade-led. If it is trade-led, what are we trading? If you look at France, which Kenyan companies are trading in France? What is the balance of payments between Kenya and France? Beyond raw tea and coffee and avocado and other things from the Western Africa, what is it that we are selling to France? Almost next to nothing. And we must not delude ourselves. We are like this bride who thinks she is so beautiful and is being courted by everybody. And the Chinese are here, the Russians are here, the Americans are here, the Turks are here, the French are here, the British are here. But that bride does not know that she is getting old and past childbearing age. And when you are old and past childbearing age, and all the cosmetics in the world can no longer change your looks, then you discover that you've been abandoned and they go to the next new bride. I'm using this analogy consciously aware that it may be considered gender insensitive, but I look at the metaphor that I'm using.
And one of the problems with African countries is the fact that we don't define our interests. It is as simple as that African countries don't define her interests. Take a look at what President Macron is doing in Africa. France, as a country, is a failed country without its colonies. That's why President Macron is clinging to African countries, at least to make sure that the country, which is France, is spearheading towards the right direction. Because without that, France will totally be a third world country. And these people, they are very calculative. They are very calculative. Look at what Macron is doing. Okay? So Macron has been chased away from the Sahel region. He has been chased away from Mali, chased away from Burkina Faso, chased away from Niger. He's on the verge of collapsing in Senegal. He's on the verge of collapsing in Togo. So, in short, France is a failed state. That's why Macron is trying his level best to cling to African countries, actually, not even the French colonies, for him to survive. Now, allow me to say this, because in one way or another, Macron is very, very calculative, because he's dealing with African countries bilaterally, okay? So he doesn't deal with African countries as a group. He comes to Kenya, deals with Kenya as a country, goes to Uganda, deals with Uganda as a country, goes to Tanzania, deals with Tanzania as a country, and that's how France is surviving. That is the problem of Africa, that we don't define our interest. So take a look at what we call the East African community. Okay? So within the East African community, we ought to have had our first president way back in 2010. We ought to have our first president in 2010. How many years since 2010? Almost 17 years. We've never had our first president. The East African community ought to have had the first president in 2010. Also in 2010, there was this aspect of removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers to make sure that African countries within the East African community, they were to trade against each other without an issue. In 2010, we ought to have had our first currency in 2010 within East African country. But look, we are totally confused. And one of the issues is our presidents. They don't define their country's interests. They are just there within themselves, trying to figure out how they'll grow wealthier as other citizens grow poorer. That is the problem with Africans. So look at what is Macron. He is in Kenya right now, okay? And sometimes I ask myself, look, for Macron to be in Kenya, number one, Kenya is a powerhouse within East Africa. That is for a fact. Kenya is a powerhouse, okay? Kenya is a powerhouse in East Africa. Talk about the labor forces. We have one of the most advanced technical people within the East African community. Look, we have multinational organizations within Kenya. We have UNEP, we have UNESCO. So we have a lot of multinational organizations within Kenya. So in one way or another, Kenya is a powerhouse. That's why Macron is here. I also ask myself this question. What do Kenyans sell to France? Because if you look at the energy sector in Kenya, who is dominating the current market in Kenya? Total Energies. Total is from French company. We have Rubis, which is French company. French is also dominating the retail sector. Look at Carrefour, for example. It's in French. It's a French company located in Kenya. So what for Kenyans, what do we sell to France? Tea, only tea, avocado. Like, are we even playing in the real league? We are selling tea to France. We are selling avocado to France. Are we playing in the real league? That is so sad. That is so sad. And you see, the problem is our leaders. They don't see what some of us are seeing. French and France, as a country, they are fighting for survival. That's why they are dealing with us bilaterally, going from one country to another, instead of dealing with us as a group, as a community, dealing with the East Africa community as a community, not individual country. Because they know in unison is strength, but we are divided. Very sad indeed. Very sad. Bearing in mind that France is clinging to African countries because it has loosened its grip within the East African community. It has loosened its grip within the African as a continent. So it's just clinging to countries which are welcoming to the government. Very sad indeed. But you know, we also have to think about this logically. Because, if I'm not wrong, 1 year ago, the president of Kenya, President Ruto, he had to seek advice. Can you even imagine this? The president of Kenya had to seek advice from Macron on how to get peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Does it even make sense that the president of Kenya is seeking advice from a colonial master on how to get peace within our region, instead of asking for advice from the members within? He goes to France, asks advice from Macron on how to make peace in Congo, between Congo and Rwanda. Failures. The problem with African leaders. Short memory, amnesia. That African leaders, they fall short of memory. So sad. And I think that we as Africans should wake up. This is a wake-up call. Sometimes we have to read about these things and come and share our views on how we see these things. So thank you for watching. If it's your first time here, kindly subscribe to this channel, and we will make Africa great again. See you next time. Bye-bye.